So, Ro, when I say the word Tevis, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Passion. Love of horses.
Yeah. How about you, Corky?
Good friends, good times, good horses, beautiful country.
Fun.
Yeah. A lot of fun. A lot of work.
And the trails,
Yeah.
the country. That's awe-inspiring, riding over the Sierras. Awe-inspiring.
And,
Starting at Tahoe. Unbelievable.
I've told people for years that Tevis was like a drug, and that it's one of those events that once you do it, you either are totally hooked or you'll never touch it again.
You know, the best place to start, because the two of you have just incredible history with this ride, from participating in it to helping and working as volunteers, and just knowing so many of the people from the early days of the ride. Maybe I can even start, like, let's just go all the way to the beginning, is you know, your experiences with Wendell, because I know both of you knew Wendell Roby, I'm sure. And
Well, Ro knew Wendell a lot better than I did.
I started with coming to Tevis because of an interest. Read about it in the 60s in Western Horseman. So did a lot of people. And in 61, after I got out of Cal Poly and could have some freedom to move around a little bit, with Ed, I came on up and check out Tevis. So met Wendell and Drew, and they were amazing because if you wanted to ride Tevis, they would give you anything. Moved up here in 1970, no jobs, we quit jobs in the Bay Area, lived in Woodside. Moved up here, and Wendell says, don't worry about a loan, let's just find you a house, and we'll make it work. And he would do that. If you were on his good side, he would do anything for you. And so looked around, ALT, etc., bought Drew's house in Loomis on Whiskey Bar Road.
Wow.
He let us assume her loan. Decent interest, even in those days. And from there, you know, it was 2 acres plus. Just moved up, started getting horses, started doing I had horses, moved up with horses and from Woodside. Bingo, and took off there and did a lot of rides with them. Did a lot of rides with Drew. Drew was such a class act lady that it was unbelievable. And riding with Wendell was an adventure.
Yeah.
Straight off a cliff, anywhere,
Yeah.
boondy bash. I remember poor Diane just being totally nutting up because we were going straight off a cliff. Paige Harper's horse got stuck in the brush. They had to get somebody to bring down some kind of clippers to get him out.
Jeez.
Oh, I mean, it was always an adventure, but it made you what you were as an endurance rider because it got to where you had no fear. Because if Wendell left you, you were on your own, baby. You find your way back.
Trails. He knew the trails.
He knew the trail, and
Right.
he knew where to go, and he had a good sense for it. So it was wonderful. And it was the same thing with driving with Wendell. Drove across Rucky Chuck in a car with him and Drew.
You drove across the river.
Drove across the river. In those days, it wasn't, I don't think the dam, when did Hellhole go? Or
I'm not sure. But
Okay, drove across. It was scary as all get out. Of course, the horses used to cross there too. But So he was quite an experience, and he would do anything for you if you were on his side. And then Drew, I mean, they became your friends and family. And that's what started. How could you not be taken? And it just changed my life.
Yeah.
And the first time I crossed No Hands Bridge with their tutelage and with their help, I knew I could do anything I ever put my mind to in my whole life. Anything.
That is a great story, Ro.
It was great.
You know, your story about coming up here because of the ride, so many people moved up here just because of that ride. And Wendell was welcoming. He wanted people to come up here and experience what he had to offer.
Well, and it was managed a little different under there, you know, because when you entered, you had to enter by December or January. You couldn't be guaranteed you'd get in, and they may only be starting 40, 60 horses compared to today. You had to have a complete blood panel and a complete vet exam in with your entry. So you were covered all the scopes and you knew what you were starting. I had a big ranch appy that I was riding. And we used to drag the hunt woodside with them, you know, the scent and stuff like that. That sucker would buck every time going downhill. And I rode totally English then. And that horse was just amazing. But he was always sort of on the lazy side on an NATRC ride. He'd go to sleep, sort of at the breaks. Did the blood panel for him for Tevis. He was anemic.
So they wouldn't let him start?
I didn't even attempt to start him.
Because the blood panel.
Because of the blood panel.
That's very interesting that they had that
From that day on,
requirement.
every time I entered Tevis, every horse I entered Tevis on had a blood panel done.
Whether they needed it or not.
Whether they needed it or not.
Right. Now, Corky, you said you'd moved up here in the 70s.
Right.
You know, early 70s.
Yes.
But you knew about Tevis way before then.
I did. When I had horses when I was a youngster, and I lived in the Los Angeles area and boarded horses at a stable. And the stable that I boarded at, the lady that ran the stable, her husband, her family owned the stable. She was having her 50th birthday, and she wanted to do something a little special to remind her, you know, of this.
Little did she know.
Of this, you know, milestone in her life. And she had read the same article that Ro had read about the Tevis in the Western Horseman, and decided that this sounded like it would be a very interesting challenge to do. So, you know, she decided she's going to enter the ride, and originally it was going to be both of her daughters and herself were going to ride the ride. Well, her youngest daughter, who you know, I knew all of the kids, but the youngest daughter was the one that I was closely involved with, and that was Dexter Yates. You know, it used to their family name was Williams, and so the older daughter and the mother came up and rode Tevis. And kind of a funny little side story to that is the mother had all summer had been conditioning a big thoroughbred mare to ride on Tevis. And, you know, comes time to load the horses up in the trailer and head north, and they could not get that thoroughbred in the trailer.
Oh, no.
So, you know, fortunately, they had a whole stable full of horses to choose from, and they you know, they had trail rides and lessons and all that kind of stuff. So she just picked out one she thought maybe could finish. And it was a big old Pinto horse, and they brought him up, and he did just fine, and they both finished.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it really was. And then another side note is somebody else that used to hang out at the same place was Dave Nicholson, and Dave, I think, ended up doing.
Renowned.
Yeah, he's, you know, he puts on a lot of rides himself, but I think he's ridden
We know
Tevis.
him as the Duck.
Yeah, known as the Duck. He's now finished Tevis, I think, probably 14 or 15 times himself. So, you know, it was just funny. Out of this one little stable, you know, there were several people that ended up riding endurance. And when I finally moved to this area, I had a little. Moved to Hawaii, lived in Hawaii for several years, and when I left Hawaii, I moved to the Sacramento area because a friend of mine lived up here. And she had a friend that was involved in Tevis. Now, unfortunately, he never finished. I mean, he started Tevis many, many times, and just was never able to finish. But he was kind of convinced that my friend that lived here, who was a good little horsewoman, and a little bitty thing, could ride his horse and finish Tevis. And that was in 1976. And she did. She rode this horse and conditioned him all summer and was able to finish Tevis. And and so my first real hands-on experience with Tevis was crewing. And I did ride my first ride that year, which was a 50-mile ride, and I didn't finish. It was the American River Ride, and it was riding a little horse, and it was one of those times when it was like 100 degrees the day of the ride, and we had a miserable time. But anyway, I didn't finish that ride. But
Is that when it started at Cal Expo?
Yeah, they started at Cal
That was a whole
Expo.
different
Yeah,
world
yeah,
on that
and you rode up the river, and yes, it was a whole different thing. But I kind of went from there. I was starting to do some breeding. I had some Arabs and was starting to do some breeding, but they were young horses and they were more involved in the breeding world and to a small extent the show world, than I was in the endurance world. But I had this god-awful old, well, she wasn't old, but she was just ugly as sin. And she was a registered Appaloosa.
You can ride her head.
Yeah, well, that's why I called her Pelican.
I remember her.
Yeah,
well.
I mean, she really did have a big, ugly head, but she was a great old honest horse, and she, there wasn't anything pretty about her, not one thing. I mean, she was pig-eyed and swishy-tailed, and but she had good legs on her, and she was stubborn in her own way, but I think it kind of worked for her. And so she was the one that I actually finished.
She was good around other horses.
Yeah, she was. She was. But and she was the one that I actually finished Tevis that I got my buckle on. And, we didn't come in dead last, but we were way at the back of the pack. But, and she had actually done the ride with another rider the year before that was kind of a fluke. I had leased her as a backup horse to a gentleman from Southern California. And this guy was very wealthy, and he was involved with the West Hills Hunt in Southern California. And the guy down there that took care of the dogs was called the Whipper In. And so this guy also trained this guy's horse, and he helped condition him and all that kind of stuff. So he came up with him, to help this guy out. So what ended up happening is he was riding my horse, to go out, because in those days it wasn't unusual for people to come up 2 or even 3 weeks before the ride and stay up here and pre-ride. And, this is what happened. The guy was up here probably at least 2 weeks before the ride. And so the trainer was taking my horse out. Well, my neighbor and I just decided the night before the ride that we'd go up to Squaw Valley just to see, how the horses were, and if he was going to end up riding my horse. Well, we go up and find out that she's entering the ride and his pal is riding him. The trainer guy was riding my horse.
Okay.
And in those days, if you knew Wendell and this guy, the gentleman from Southern California was, very well acquainted, very well known and very well acquainted with Wendell. And, you could get in at the last minute like that if you had the right connections, which he did. And, by golly, he finished the ride. They both did. It was kind of amazing because I had no idea until that day that my horse was going to be doing the Tevis, but she did and she finished.
Ro, when your first Tevises were actually started at the town of Tahoe City.
Tahoe City.
And so what was that like to start there?
It was really fun because you vetted on the lake. So I have some pictures somewhere, Bob, of vetting on the lake, and you stayed in what they called the cabbage patch, which was across the highway, and it was literally a cabbage patch. I don't know what it is now, near the golf course and stuff, I think. And horses everywhere, trucks, trailers everywhere. The town was very open. They were very nice. And then we'd start at the post office, that picture that has Wendell in the front from the first ride.
Yeah.
Where they did all of that. And you rode under a controlled start, which on a 100-mile ride with a hot horse is really fun. A little difficult to keep things under control. And you rode down what is now a paved bike path along the Truckee River. and you went a certain distance and then cut over a bridge and ended up wandering through the knee knocker trees to Squaw Valley. But going down that bike trail, there were always people. There were people camped on it. You were jumping sleeping bags.
Yeah, because you're going through there at 5 in the morning.
Yeah, and it was just unbelievable. And people trying to get out of the way, and horses spooking. And if anybody from Attack Supply followed the trail from there to Squaw Valley, or to actually Alpine Meadows, you could start a tack store with the bottles and the saddle blankets and the everything else flying off right and left. Then you got into, and I think it was Bear Creek that we started at, and you started in a controlled start.
Okay.
4 at a time, groups of 4. So you played the chase game the whole ride. If you were in group 1, you were always looking over your shoulder and what group are you in? What group are you in? If you were in group 20, what group were you in? Oh, you were in the second group, the first group. Well, you knew you had them. All you had to do was keep them in sight.
Right.
And you could beat them if you got through all the vet checks. The vet checks were really a lot looser when you came into a spot for a vet check, let's say Robinson. You had a crew. The ride didn't provide anything for you. You had a crew, they brought your water, they set you up, they had hay, they had everything there. And at that point, your horse could take a break. You came in, they took P&Rs, I can't remember in what sequence. They checked, you were okay, and then you went back for a recheck. That's when they took the P&Rs. You had a little bit of time. They could relax, they could eat, they could drink. You could pull the saddle. You had time to do that, which you don't do now.
No.
You get in and people are throwing, everything, it's a mess. And then they vetted out in the meadow. It was beautiful in that meadow when they had the cattle in, now they don't run cattle up there anymore. So it's all getting all brambled and bushed again, so they can't use the meadow anymore. It was just a whole different world. I mean, we rode McClellans and English saddles. You didn't have endurance saddles. You had cowboy boots. You didn't have running shoes. You didn't have water bottles, so you carried a Sierra cup with you and drank out of the creek. Thank you, Giardia. And stuff like that. I mean, it was just a whole different world. We rode by the seat of our pants, and we learned with every step we took, because we didn't have the vet stuff either then, those days. They had basics, for what you could take care of a horse, but they didn't know all the parameters of the thumping and the P&Rs and what the different things meant that was happening, dehydration. We did a check once at UC Davis where we took horses and they ran us around a track and they measured the sweat to see if you had heavy sweat or light sweat.
Yeah.
And a heavy sweat horse is going to be a horse, my quarter thoroughbred mare, is not going to do as well because they have to hydrate more than the others. So it was a real learning experience, and I think that the veterinary field jumped into it so much because it was something that had never been seen before. A horse couldn't go 100 miles in one day.
Well, that was one of the great things about Tevis was we have 50 some odd years of record now, and we watched the progress and understanding, putting, what we've done, how we're able to put a horse through stress and what the best way to vet a horse to make sure that they don't get into trouble. And we have this now, but it was those early days that really, veterinarians being interested in it, that, got things going in the right direction.
And we all learned together. We were all careful because you didn't like, we rode the horses pretty lean in those days.
Yeah.
We learned that lean isn't the best thing in the world. It's like your endurance runners now. Some of your more muscled runners do better, the little chunkier ones, than the skinny.
Well, we learned about diet too.
That's right.
And so maybe we were feeding them 10 pounds of sweet feed, thinking we were doing something good for them, but we weren't. But that's what we had.
And alfalfa.
That's what we had.
Alfalfa.
And alfalfa and different calories that weren't necessarily helping the horse. Now we know about fat and fiber and things, but we had to learn that from the early days.
Well, electrolytes.
And
Yeah.
electrolytes.
We made our own electrolytes up.
So in the
Now,
early-
she crushed pills that she found later in the 70s, but in the 60s, Todd had a formula and Lou Hollander had some formula. And we crushed everything up, mixed it up ourselves, and either put it in the paste or put it in our water.
It was 1 part light salt, 1 part regular salt, 1 part dolomite.
Yeah.
And then 2 parts regular salt.
Yeah,
that
that
was
was
Todd's
yeah.
formula, I remember. So,
Yeah, and I'm sad that we didn't do anything with him. He wasn't mentioned anywhere that he had passed. So,
I know.
but that's a thing. We'll,
And he was definitely, Todd Nelson was definitely one of those veterinarians that put a lot of interest in.
well, he
in our
sure did a
sport,
lot for
and-
his customers.
Yeah, he did. He did.
I had a mare we pre-rode into the mine from Michigan Bluff. And it was Paige Harper and Elaine Dowden and myself and Mickey, Stacy. Mickey's riding my little Fajur mare, and I was riding an Abu Faro bred mare that had nothing done till 6. So her history wasn't real well known until I bought her. And I bought her up in Trinidad, California, up on the coast, where there are no horses up there. But anyway, and we rode into the canyon, got to the mine. And Paige knew the people that ran the mine, had lunch there. And I came out, and the respiration was really elevated on her. And I thought, whoa, that's not right. It was a real hot day. It was 100 and some degrees. And we'd done 90% walking through the canyons. And started back, and I told Paige and Elaine, wait for us up at Devil's Thumb. Something's wrong with this mare. It wasn't a great amount of knowledge I had. It was just a gut feeling that was telling me something was wrong. We got down to the first creek, Mickey and I checked her mucous membranes, and they were blue.
Yeah.
So I tailed out part way, then we switched. I'd get on BJ, and Mickey would tail, and then we switched, and we got up to Michigan Bluff, and went over to the halls, and called Todd, and he was out of town on a ride. So I called Dr. Barcelow, and he said, bring her over. And it ended up that we don't know what happened. She was a conditioned horse. She'd done 50-mile rides. Don't know what happened. She went into an electrolyte imbalance, basically. Todd lived at my house. Lived at it for days. He'd go and take care of his animals, he'd come back, go and take care of that, come back. And we pulled her through most of it, but then she went into a toxic founder.
Oh, no.
Because she was going into kidney failure and everything else. We still don't. He went to the rendering place and did a complete necropsy on her, everything but the brain. He was convinced it had to be a blockage of worms. He found nothing. So you never know. You can do the best preparation in the world. You never know.
You definitely can.
And of course, Elaine and Paige hadn't waited.
Yeah.
So we didn't have anybody to go out and get help.
Well, you know, Corky, you started in the 70s, you know, with the sport, and I always think about the 70s with Tevis and AERC being formed, and just the excitement of what the direction that endurance riding was going to go. You know, it was one of the fast at that time, becoming the fastest growing equestrian activity, you know, sport in the world.
There were many rides that I rode that it was the biggest ride that they'd ever had.
Yeah.
You know, the most entries that, I mean, oh gee, I mean, it wasn't unusual to have 200 and 300 horses
American River
at a
used them.
ride, and you know, and in those days, most of the rides would just accept them. You know, they thought, oh, this is great, you know, and they would accept them. I remember that ride down to Mendocino.
Drake's Bay?
No, not the Drake's Bay. You know the one I'm talking
Mendocino.
about. The money ride down there at.
I never did it.
Yeah, you did. You were there. You won a saddle.
Oh, that's not Mendocino.
Well, not Mendocino.
That was San Luis Obispo.
Okay, yes, San Luis
okay.
Obispo.
Yeah, that was the
and that
Mount Madonna ride.
the Madonna Mount or whatever. But that ride was huge. I think there was 300.
Yeah, you
horses.
were too busy that night. No wonder you don't remember.
But
I swept up in a camper shell with a girlfriend and her son. That's another story.
Yeah, well, he let you his shoes one time.
I know
so
what
don't
he
complain. But that ride, there was 300 horses. I think the year that
At Madonna Inn.
Yeah, Madonna Inn.
Okay.
I think one of the years that I did Tevis, it was the biggest ride they ever had, and that was kind of before the Forest Service was putting a lot of limits on the number of horses and starters and whatnot that you could have.
I did win a saddle.
But there were several, several rides that I went to that, and there weren't that many rides back then. It was part of it.
No.
So that people that were getting new to this sport, they wanted to go to a ride and everybody go to the same ride.
And I was riding a horse from hell.
At that ride?
Oh, I have a picture of, what's that gal's name? She's been around forever. My horse's nose is in her horse's butt, literally, because I couldn't slow this sucker down. He was another Shannon bred horse. And if she'd gone off the cliff, I wouldn't even slow down. I didn't have gloves. My hands were so bloody. Somebody finally felt for me and gave me gloves. And, pulled on them. The only place I've ever been hospitalized for asthma was San Luis Obispo when I was at Cal Poly, okay? Well, of course, I get asthma during this ride. So I'm feeling like crap. And I get in there, and I don't know if you know Dick Treffel.
No.
Okay, he's an old horseshoer. Used to be a school teacher. Now raises goats in Hawaii, the Big Island. Interesting individual. He says, here, use my inhaler. Oh, you have an inhaler? Great. It was Coke.
Oh.
Oh, my God. The girl who doesn't do drugs.
He didn't. Oh.
He didn't
it wasn't
tell
an
me.
inhaler like.
No, it was
you
one
breathe-
of those nasal.
Nasal things, and he didn't tell you it was Coke?
No.
Oh. So now you got a horse on Coke, basically.
Oh, God.
And
this
yourself
horse,
on
I sold
Coke.
that horse right after that ride. And that's unusual for me. And I was just, oh, boy. I think I passed out that night.
Yeah, I think you did.
You were too busy in your camper,
I
so
know.
Chris and I went over and slept in the horse trailer in the horse shit. I didn't even notice that.
But you want a saddle.
But I want to
She
saddle.
did. She won a saddle.
And that's the bathroom where the men's urinal is the waterfall. That was pretty interesting. So
Oh, yeah, it was at that big famous
Madonna Inn.
Right.
Madonna Inn hotel.
Yeah.
And they had all these rooms that were all different suites, all different deals. They had a jungle room and just all kinds of strange stuff.
Got a great belt buckle.
Yeah, they did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Those are the days you still got belt buckles. That and Blue
Yeah.
Mountain, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they were silver.
Yeah. they
So,
were.
and that was the great thing about that time period, wasn't it? As far as our sport is concerned, just a lot of excitement, huh?
Well, when I started doing the rides, and with a lot of the people in the old days, Walt Tibbetts. Used to love Walt. His horse guaranteed if he crossed the sandbar, it'd go down and roll. It was just always the big bet. What sandbar is Walt going to go down on? Banner. And we had no rides. There was no endurance rides except Tevis. Period.
Yeah.
So we did competitive NATRC rides. And you got your horse to go through the hands-on, the vet check, and the whatnot, but you had to keep him tied to the trailer all night long. Well, you know the rules.
Yeah.
It was just pretty much of I think, got to know the experience of people and the vets and a lot of endurance riders. So then, Kathy Perry and some of it, we got to do something. We got to have some rides. So we all got together and got American River Ride going. And then Sister came in and said, this stuff is so cool. Because everybody heard of Tevis. So she said, I think I'm going to start something over in Castle Rock, in her country, and get that started. So that got started. And then in knowing the tones, Blue Mountain got started. So then and from there it just grew
It just
crazily.
took off. Well, you bring up NATRC because I did an interview with
great
Phil Gardner, and he said when they were forming forming AERC, our endurance body, that there was pushback on it because most of the riders that were going from NATRC to AERC didn't want the rules, and because there were so many rules in NATRC that they didn't want rules. They just wanted it to be
judges on the trail judging you, hiding in the bushes.
Right.
And you had to stop somebody 2 miles from the finish and go in You had a minimum and a maximum time.
Tevis has never really followed AERC rules in so many aspects, and both of you have been board members, presidents of the Board of Governors of Western States Trail Foundation. Why is it that the Tevis kind of stands on its own as far as AERC versus the Western States 100-mile ride?
Good question. Hard to answer.
There's no weight divisions.
There's no weight divisions. And of course, I come from both sides. As I think AERC has developed that and maybe gone, in my opinion, overboard on some of these awards. That's why we're going in a little different direction than I'd like to see AERC go. I'd kind of like to go backwards on some of this stuff. Just because you ride a ride and finish a ride, you don't need an award. You don't need 3 awards. You don't need 5 awards. If you win the ride, you get 3 or 4 different awards. And there's, it's a matter of riding a ride and finishing the ride. And I think that's where Wendell was, that, we don't need any recognition for any of this. It's about riding the trail. It's about the history of the trail. And I think that was one of the hang-ups that he really didn't want to do. It costs money. It costs $1. He had to pay $1 a rider, and he didn't want to do that. So,
and all of that. So when Kathy, Phil, Gordy, myself, some of the others, all got together and said, we're getting these rides started, and we don't have anybody to help other people get started. That's how AERC got founded. We'd meet at my house and we'd meet at Kathy's house most of the time. And we said, we've got to do something to help get information to people on how to put on an endurance ride. And we got Wendell sort of involved and Drew involved and Marion and some of the others. And so let's get together and do this. And that's how it got started. Then somebody brought up Dave Claggett.
Yeah.
Marion. Let's do it. And so then somebody said, well, why don't we keep the points for people? And from there it developed. And then when they had people coming in and trying to do the money stuff, the Dubai stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, then that's when we all agreed, thank God we were old school. No money. It can't be AERC sanctioned if there's money. Great conventions originally.
Well,
it protects
that ride
the horse
that we were just talking about was a money ride.
I don't think so.
Yes, it was. Kathy Perry won it, and that was a money ride. I don't think it was a whole lot of money, but it was a money ride.
They had a raffle,
and,
I know that.
Yeah, they had a raffle, but that was a money ride. You ask Kathy, believe me.
I will.
But there was that bad
Yeah, I
ride
don't
they
remember
had
that.
back in the Midwest that started out as an AERC ride, then they washed their hands of it.
Oh, that fellow where the horses ran into the car going across
Excuse
the road?
me.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, several horses died.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They're just,
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about that. Do you prefer to ride a mare?
oh God, yes.
Yeah?
More heart. I think they have
Yeah?
more heart.
Yeah?
More
And
gumption.
we've both ridden stallions.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You know, we've both ridden stallions on rides. And,
Bitchier.
No? They
The
can
horses.
be? Yeah?
well, I mean, I've had stallions and mares and geldings, and I prefer mares. They're my favorite.
They seem to have a deeper bottom. And I rode one mare that could just really move along, and she'd just get along with everybody, and she never was a kicker, never allowed the coming into cycle being a problem. Well, if you put a stallion right next to them, but that's, what the heck.
Right.
And I never had a problem with her, but we'd be riding like down the quarry road, and you'd come try up next to me and come try to get next to me. You'd be on your gelding, and she'd go, and the gelding would just go in reverse. I mean, it was wonderful.
Yeah.
Try to pass me on a narrow trail,
yeah.
ain't gonna happen. Not unless I give you the trail. Mares are wonderful.
Yeah, a lot of people don't like them, but I've always gotten along with them. And, that big gelding, that big gray gelding of mine, he was a different kind of a animal, but
Yeah.
You know, I like mares.
Well, I'm not sure about the statistics now, but a few years back, they did the statistics on Tevis, and actually mares had a better completion
Percentage.
rate than geldings, as far as, you know, maybe not as many mares were entered in the ride, but they did have a better completion
Rode some
rate.
great geldings. I'm not taking anything away
Yeah.
from them.
Yeah, but you just like the riding
But
mares.
I just like the sort of,
Yeah, I agree. They have a little bit more heart. They go just a little, they dig a little deeper for you.
be a little
But,
quirkier, you
Yeah.
know. And most people don't want to deal with the estrus cycles.
Yeah.
But I've just never allowed that to be a problem, and it's never been a problem. And same with my stallion when I was riding him. Yeah, you're not going to drop and go,
Yeah.
because it's going to get whacked. You want to get it whacked? And it'll get whacked. He never, when I was on his back, he never was a problem. He never did the attack somebody potato thing.
Right. Did you ride many rides on your stallion?
Quite a few, but when I was talking to Terry about it, he, best-legged horse, and she reminded me that when she was showing him, many judges, top 10 national judges, said this horse would be placed, except he's too short. He was only 14.3. In those days, they had to be over 50-something. And he was Egyptian bred, triple Nazir out of a Marafic mare. Unbelievable horse. Could ride him from here to Squaw Valley with you, no troubles. Take him on a ride with a vet check or with whatever, the excitement of the people being there, he'd thump.
Oh, yeah.
He choked on Tevis, and I think that was probably precursor to thump. Coming up Devil's Thumb, he got some hay coming up, and he choked. And every ride that we took him into competition, he would thump, and we think it's a calcium.
Well, that's what they're finding out now.
Things that they're
It's
coming
more-
up with now.
Yeah.
Awesome horse. Produced awesome babies that did a lot of endurance rides, a lot of riding ties. Jeff Wittenhausen, a horse he did real well, was a Moses son.
Okay.
And so I found him to be, it killed me. It killed me not to be able to take him on rides because he was really strong uphill, which is great. Not real good downhill, but really strong uphill. And it was just sort of a disappointment, but it wasn't into the breeding him. And when I finally gelded him, because I wanted to use them in search and rescue, because I helped make the rules up that we don't allow stallions. Well, you give a stallion to a young lady that's standing there and she's holding a stallion and 6 mares
Yeah.
and doesn't know much about horses. It's just an accident waiting to happen. When I got pulled out of, the year I rode him, out of Devil's Thumb, that was when they were using, I wish I could think of that guy's name, it'll come to me, a Tone cousin. They threw them all in a great big open stock truck. Stallions, mares, everything.
Oh, jeez.
And I thought, oh, this is not good. He didn't do anything.
Well, they used to when they bring them in. In the old days, there was a corral up where the post office
That's funny.
in Forest Hill is.
Uh-huh.
They threw all the horses in the corral and you just went and got your horse. You
Oh, if you
and
got pulled
If you
and-
got pulled,
uh-huh.
like a dead
They'd haul
wood
them
or
out.
Right. They just haul them out,
they'd
dump
haul
them
them out in a
in
big stock trailer, and you know they just drop them there, and everybody knew to go there to pick your horse up.
Yeah.
And I've certainly heard of more than one mare being bred, and you know while they're there.
Well,
You know, Shirley Gregory, that one time they didn't find out until, I don't know, I think it might have been right after the ride. She went through on a mare. Now, her husband's a veterinarian, or was, and the mare was pregnant.
when she started the ride.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's happened more than once.
Oh, it definitely has. Yeah.
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 It's not the best recommendation, but
No.
it can
No.
happen. They're tough.
They are. Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
what can we say?
So when you talk about stallions, we were talking earlier that I was really glad to have the two of you here because of not only just your history with this ride, but both of you were also Arab breeders. You bred horses,
Yeah, small
you know,
time
from
for me, but
yeah. Well, you know, I mean, but you're thinking about different crosses and what would work with what mare with your stallion. And Corky, I own 2 of your Gandy Dancer, a filly and a gelding. He produced some good endurance horses and just good athletes.
He did.
And so, being breeders and endurance riders.
Winner.
Yeah, Potatoes
mare.
That's right.
Yeah, Potatoes mare that won the Tevis was by Gandy.
Was by Gandy.
My mare was a Gandy daughter, my last mare.
Right.
Didn't
Well, that's
endurance
something to be
riders.
very proud of.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I actually did ride Gandy on a couple of endurance rides, and he just kind of, he'd been a show horse, done all different kinds of things in the show ring, and he
Stock horse.
well,
He was
stock horse. He was a pretty good working cow horse, and we did quite a bit of that on him. But decided, that I wanted to see if he could do some rides, and I decided I was going to take him out to the XP ride, and this was in the day when the XP rides were not circle rides. You went out and you rode 50 miles and you camped, and then you rode another 50 miles, and the camp had to move 50 miles down the road. But I thought they were a little bit more fun that way, but they were much harder, and when I say harder,
logistics.
They were logistics. Yeah, you had to have a driver, and it was just more difficult. So I understand why they do them the way they do them now. But anyway, I decided I was going to take him on a couple of the take him out there and ride him for a couple of different days. And I rode him on the first day of the ride, then I rode him on the last day of the ride. And considering he'd probably only been conditioned for maybe 3 months. Besides being a show horse, where of course he was ridden, and it wasn't like he was standing around in the stall all the time. But he did, he finished both days, without any problems. And I would have liked to have done some more rides on him, but that was, I'm trying to think, I think that was probably in the fall. And the next spring, he was back being shown again. And he ended up having to have intralith surgery.
That's right.
That's for people that aren't familiar.
Yeah, they were big too. I remember.
A big blockage removed, from his intestine. And I know there are people nowadays that horses have had intralith or other types of intestinal surgery, and they've gone on to compete with the horses.
A lot of them haven't too, though.
In endurance riding, and I just didn't feel.
You didn't want to take the risk.
Yeah, I didn't want to take the risk. And this was in 1988. And I mean, he came through the surgery just fine. There was, there was a couple of after effects that I'm sure were part of the surgery. And, his sweat pattern on his hind end totally changed after the surgery.
Oh, how interesting.
And I think it was probably had to do with the fact that he was laid down on his back for amount of time. And it probably did some damage to, surface damage to some of the sweat muscles and stuff back there. But he just had a very strange sweat pattern after that. And he also had a tendency where he'd never had it before to get hives. And he'd never ever gotten hives before. But other from that, he was fine. He lived to be 29 years old.
He did.
And, so he was, I believe, 7 when he had the surgery.
Wow.
So I mean, the surgery, for him, it paid off, and he, lived out and had a very nice life afterwards. But when I moved to Nevada in the year 2000, and I took Gandy with me. But then, I don't know, some life circumstances changed, and I decided I was going to go to work. And of all things, I chose truck driving as a career, and you're gone a lot. You're just not home. And he was, the horse was like 20 years old at the time, and I knew the Potato liked the horse. He'd bred to the horse a couple of different times.
Yeah.
With, to his first Tevis winner. And he actually bred Gandy to his old mare, Kaylana, way back when, and had there was a colt that came out of that cross that actually ended up doing the Tevis when I think he was 24 years old.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah, which most people don't even know about.
Wow.
And he didn't have the horse anymore. It belonged to one of his ex-wives ended up with the horse. But, you know, so he always liked that cross. And anyway, I at that point in time, I just wanted to find the horse a good home. And so I gave Gandy to Potato. And what most people I don't think actually know is that we had done a lot of embryo transfers on this
Yes.
mare, you know, because at that point in time he was still riding her, and she had one foal and lost it when it was about 4 days old, and you know, but then wanted to do it again, and we did it. And what was really funny is that mare, this was the year she won the Tevis. She won the Tevis. He calls me 2 days later, she's in heat. I want to breed her.
Oh.
Do it. And that's the embryo transfer that worked. And that was the baby that won the Tevis 3 years ago, 2014.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It's a
Wow.
very...
The law of averages are against that.
Yeah.
It was just a very incredible story. But if two horses could be in love, those two horses were totally in love. And, you know, Gandy got to live out the rest of his life with her.
With
in
her,
the same
in the
barn.
same pasture.
They all in the
Yeah.
same stall, the same
Yeah.
barn. They ate together, they slept together. You know, they really did love each other. What can I say? So, it was like a little...
Better than our record.
You know, it was just a nice love story that came true in these horses. So,
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
pretty good.
yeah, he kinda
And
lived-
it's the things that we're seeing, like with his Interlith. Phil got a mare from her, Barrick and Kumar.
yeah.
Or Kumar Bebo daughter, yeah.
Yeah.
And she had a twisted gut.
Yeah.
And had surgery as a foal. So it was, what you should do. And Phil, being somewhat of a novice rider, wasn't interested and would go crew. And then all of a sudden he wanted to do a ride. Go figure. And we took her on the Lahontan ride, and what other one did he take her on?
It was one of those rides that Levon put on out in the desert, out there by
Yeah, that's
by
right.
High Rock.
That's when his mother died.
Yeah.
Yeah, out by High Rock.
Rock, yeah.
And she went through, we just go through easy. No hurry.
Yeah.
Because Tevis, I always hurried. I had to be in before the bar closed.
Yeah.
And in those days, that guaranteed...
It was the Shanghai, right? Or-
Yeah, or somewhere. And that more or less guaranteed you close to a top 10, top 15 position. And so, you know, I was always 11th. 11th with Dr. Barslow, by the way.
Yeah.
He let me go first. 11th, 13th, I think. And then with my old mare, with the 18-year-old mare, the quarter horse thoroughbred Morgan, whatever she was, 16-hand mare, I finished down in the 30s with Kathy Perry. A lot of intertwining connections with people.
There are a lot.
A lot of connections in the
Yeah.
old days. We one thing with the rides, we socialized. We'd get there the night before. None of this driving in at 8 o'clock at night wanting to be vetted or anything. You'd get there the day before early. You'd take Friday off, and you'd get there. You'd go in and you'd get your horse vetted, and you'd take care of the horse, and you'd relax. And then you'd socialize. And you'd socialize to 2, 3, 4 in the morning, get up for an hour, get an hour's worth of sleep, get up and go for a dance. Oh God, we used to do things. And then you'd get up and do the ride. And then you'd spend the night and sort of taper off and have the, you know, the banquet and the barbecue and whatnot, and get up the next morning and have breakfast. Took your time. Gave the horse a chance to relax after the ride. And then you put them in the trailer and go home. And we just had a ball. Met some of the nicest people in the world. Just totally nice people.
We were talking about Gandy. You know, I had two. You gave me a mare. You told me if I could catch her, I could have her.
That's right.
So I went out there with a catch rope.
Old school, wasn't it wonderful?
I went out there with a catch rope and got her.
Oh God.
And that was Bo.
Yes.
And then I ended up with the Anglo Arab.
Right, from
Whit
Yeah.
Whit Kennedy.
Yep.
Gandy Dancer. No, what was his name? Oh, My Do Dancer.
Okay.
My
Okay.
Do. Yeah. And but Gandy Dancer was your stallion's name. But he was a Berwick to Washoe son.
Yes, he
Yes.
was a Berwick Washoe son. He was out of an Azraf daughter.
Well, that was what was so incredible, because that mare was, what, 20 years old? Wasn't she pretty old when you got her in foal? No, she wasn't.
No, she wasn't.
Okay.
No, she was. I think that mare was maybe 14 years
Oh,
old
she
when
wasn't
I
that
bought
old.
her.
Okay.
And she was heavy in foal when I bought her, and she had a colt. Mm-hmm. And it was after that baby was born, I bred her to Berwick. Yeah.
And I know with Brew Marva and Bruce and Jerry, they were probably pretty excited to have to breed that Azraf daughter, because that's like one of their best combinations
Yeah.
Yes.
with Berwick.
Yeah, Comar Bay Beau was an Azraf son.
Right.
And the Comar Bay Beau daughters crossed really, really well on Berwick.
Yes.
You know, so it was more or less a proven cross. You know, that the babies would turn out rather nice. And as I said, they were taking the
And athletic.
you know, the Azraf granddaughters, you know, and breeding. So, you know, sure, it made sense to breed a regular Azraf daughter.
And with Berwick being a Spanish horse, we don't really see a lot of the Spanish horses doing endurance.
They're tough.
A good cross seems to work for the you know, to be an endurance horse.
Sure, and Gandy had a really good bone. You know, he had a lot of bone, a lot of leg.
And body.
Yeah,
did.
yeah,
He
yeah.
had body.
He was big bodied horse, but he was symmetrical. You know, he wasn't. You know, he didn't. His rear end wasn't up here, and the front end wasn't
Right.
down there. He was a
You
very.
didn't have that tabletop,
No,
croup
no,
that
no.
they
In
look
fact,
for
we
now
looked, we didn't
in the
want
show.
that
You didn't want the
tabletop
tabletop,
croup.
right?
Yeah.
You wanted the
But
little bit of
he
slope.
was a very, very athletic horse, and he could do anything. One of the trainers I had him with, her husband was a roper, and when he was young, and they'd take him to horse shows, or not to horse shows, but to ropings, just to get him used to traveling, you know, and going and being tied to a horse trailer or whatever. And they'd take him out, and he'd heel off of him. You know, even though Gandy was a good sized horse, you can't usually head off of an Arab, but you can sure heel off of him. You know, and he wasn't afraid of cows at all. And
He handled it.
Yeah. Matter of fact, we had to wire his mouth shut when we were working cow with him,
Because he tried to bite them.
Yeah, he tried to bite the cows, but you can't do that. You get points taken off if they bit the cows. But yeah, he was good. He knew what his job was.
His daughter that I had was great with cattle.
Yeah.
And people would look at her, they'd see her, and she definitely showed the Berwick in her. And they'd look at her, and because 2 bays and you get a chestnut. Okay, well, wasn't prepared for that one, and they'd say, okay, what is she? She looks sort of Arab, and she was. And 7, 8, 15, 16s. But does she have Morgan? Well, her grandmother was the Morgan Thoroughbred Quarter Cross.
Yeah.
And the Morgan showed she had that Morgan sort of upness a little bit more so than, amazing horse.
Well, I always I like
Absolutely
my
amazing.
Arabs to look like quarter horses, and my quarter horses to look like Arabs.
That is exactly what I got with her.
Right.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
most people thought she was a quarter horse. The day that I ended up having to put her down, she had gone, all of her lineage, and when I really started checking back, not on Corky's side, but on my side, had Cushing's. And she was what they called pre-Cushing's. And so we were really keeping an eye on her and taking the test for her. And she was starting to go there. And there's just one time she just was fine. I wasn't riding her a lot then. She was in her 20s, 24, 25, somewhere like that. And all of a sudden I walked out and she was like this. And she found her.
She found her.
So the vet came out, Todd and Larry Goss came out and they checked, and she had a sinker. And they're trying to tell me, let's put on the wood shoes. I said, wait a minute.
There's not much of
We
a
can't breed her.
chance on
We
him.
can't. She's going to have to be in a little paddock. She can't be on, all of this stuff. But she was tough. When Larry's coworker came then because he was tied up to put her down, and I let her out, and she went into the stall. I just had her loose in the barn. And she said, "This is not the horse we're putting down," because she looked magnificent.
Yeah.
She wasn't showing any of that other cushion-oyed thing.
Yeah.
She was shiny, big chestnut, a lot of chrome, like you say.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. And I said, "Well, watch," and I let her out onto the gravel, and she just about
was
went down.
Walking on eggshells. Yeah. Yeah, that's a rough way to lose a horse. So with your stallion, you said he was Egyptian bred.
Egyptian bred.
And did you?
And that was pure fluke. I went to a sale to help out Sid Morris and his wife that owned Potato now owns. They own that ranch. And we were picking out horses for them to buy, and this horse went through, this little gray yearling stallion. The people thought they were buying a mare. Okay. And so they put him back through at the end of the sale. And, I was a hardworking girl then, and I was momentarily single. And they said, "Well, okay." And Sid turned to me and he said, "You want him, don't you?" And I said, "Oh, I'd love to have him." And he says, "Let's buy him." I said, "I don't have any money. I can't afford even hundreds of dollars." He said, "Let's buy him." He went through $150. $10,000 stud fee on his sire.
Wow.
That's what can happen in the horse business. You never know. So I came home with the best horse I ever owned next to the mare,
Yeah.
which was partially his bloodlines too. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you used them for breeding too,
Yeah.
didn't you? And had some mares that you bred and did some outside
Yeah,
breeding.
and some outside breeding, but it's hard to do. It's hard to do.
It is. It's a tough
And
business.
work full-time job.
Yeah. Well, what's happened now is since 2008, when the economy went really bad and people left their mares open, they stopped breeding, and now in our market we're having a really difficult time finding those 7-8-year-old horses because we have to wait that long to do
anything with them,
our sport with them, and they're getting more and more difficult to find. You have to really search out those horses, that age group especially.
Well, horses it's gotten to be an extremely expensive hobby anymore.
Well, it always has
to
been.
own horses.
Always
Yes, of course it always has been, but I mean, I think now, in comparison now, I mean, 30 years ago, you didn't see people giving up their horses, to rescues or whatnot, because they couldn't afford to keep them anymore. And I mean, that happens almost on a daily basis now.
Well, what do you get for shoeing now?
Exactly.
And I think
it gets expensive.
I remember $12.
No, I think when I first started shooting for you guys, it was probably $25.
So Gene Lockhart, it was God.
Well, when I was a kid in Los Angeles, it cost $10 for shoes. And you could also buy a ton of hay in Los Angeles. A ton of alfalfa hay for $10.
I see both of you at the rides still. When I go, I saw you just recently at Virginia City, and so you're going to the rides. You're kind of observing and reconnecting with some of the old timers that you remember. What do you see now as far as the direction our sport is going? And just your observation. I mean, where would you like to see our sport go?
I see less socialization amongst the event and people getting to know each other. I see more. You go to a ride and at 7:30, 8 o'clock, of course you see all the living quarter trailers, and that's a little different than what we used to do. Yeah. And I'm not
we could
saying
just
it's worse.
go in our trailer and hide.
And that's what they did.
Because nobody's sleeping in tents or sitting around a picnic bench.
Right.
And if we're out sitting and talking like this, say the three of us, somebody will stick their hat on and say, "Can't you shut up? We're trying to sleep here." It's taken some of the fun out of it. And as I say, we used to come in on Friday and then be there and do the ride Saturday and stay Sunday. And
back in the day, if you had a camper, if you had a 2-horse trailer and a camper, you were styling.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, God, I think the first 5 or 6 years that I rode endurance, I slept in the back of my truck.
Pickup or in the horse trailer.
And if it was bad weather, you slept on the horse trailer. And I'm talking a little 2-horse trailer, nothing fancy here. You know, you'd pull the pad off the chaise lounge in the backyard, you know, and throw it in the back of the truck with a, you know, with a sleeping bag, and that was it. You know, yeah. I mean, it really has, the whole dynamic has really
And if you couldn't
changed.
carry enough water, you had enough wine.
And you know, I guess if I could give, you know, young people that are doing this sport anything, it's yeah, it's a sport, and it's all right to be competitive, but you know, don't forget to have fun, and don't forget why you're really there. You're there with your horse, and you're there to experience this beautiful part of nature that most people never get to see. You know, and especially on the Tevis, you get to see a part of California that so few people ever get to see, get to experience.
And you're back to the point of it's a point-to-point ride, which is more of a challenge.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's why we have so much fun. And the other thing I think that people need to realize, which I'm seeing less and less of, you still see it, but is the unique partnership between horse and rider.
Absolutely.
Well, and you know, one thing that I really liked that AERC did was this a thing that they have now where they recognize a team between a horse and a rider that have been together for 10 years. You know, and that does take a special person and a special horse, and you have to have that connection in order to last 10 years with an animal like that.
Yeah, you have to have the partnership.
Right.
You do.
Yeah, and you know, so I think that's great, and it's too bad that everybody can't, you know, find a horse and do that.
Well, it's the goal. And
I think they're working towards doing that in a way, but they've gotten off in different directions because they've gotten off more on the points.
AERC's motto has always been to finish is to win. And that will, if you ride endurance with that attitude, with that horse, you will have a decade horse. But if you ride with, I want a top 10 rides and I want to win rides, you probably won't have, I mean, there might be a few out there that can do it under good management, but you're not going to have, the chances of having a decade horse are very slim.
Yeah, and there's so many people that they want to be competitive, and they'll just go through horses.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a shame, you know, and it's certainly not everybody, because not everybody can afford to do that, for one. But you know, you see it often enough that it's a shame.
Well, it's like anything. When you're really competitive, you're really competitive.
Yeah.
But you have to sort of bring it down when you think of your partner. I was doing a ride once, and I did not know I was leading. I was on Lilo Swayze's horse, who used to be worked for Auburn Lumber, one of Wendell's places. He was a friend of Drew's, and she couldn't handle this horse. I mean, he was a handful, and he was a Shannon-bred horse again, Hand Shannon. He went back to Witez. I found the Witez bloodlines and the Abu Farwa bloodlines, the old Gloucester, those old bloodlines were just excelled for me.
Yeah.
I don't know about anybody else, but they excelled for me. Never did I think an Egyptian horse would come in, but you look at the heritage in that also, and you can see when you're getting that blend together is awesome. And so you have to just sort of take the care of your horse. That's what we learned so much starting so early, is because we didn't know anything. And so you really had to pay attention to and learn by the mistakes. I mean, I remember Smokey once. I said, Smokey, what are you doing? And I was drug testing. I had my jar and everything with me. And he was feeding his horse Coke syrup.
Coke syrup.
Coca-Cola syrup.
Okay.
And he said, why can't I do that? I said, because it's illegal.
It has caffeine in it.
$10,000 fine, but we won't quibble over that. I think it was banned. And I said, so you don't do it. And kids at horse shows, same thing. We should see them giving them chocolate and candy bars and letting them drink coffee and stuff like that. Well, that's fine if you want to do that, but you will be found positive, and we found positives for things like that, as well as cocaine and a lot of other stuff in horses at the, well, we won't go what breed. It's just one of those things that you have to first and foremost take care of yourself and your horse, and then worry about the first placing or the 10th placing or the 80th placing afterwards, depending on how your day is going. I remember Pat Fitzgerald saying to me once, I'm riding down on this Shannon-bred horse of Lila Swayze's on Tevis. And he says to me, oh, your horse's poop looks awful dry. You better slow down. Mm-hmm. Well, you know how Pat was. Mm-hmm. He worked it. Oh. Well, he worried me. And I said, oh, God. So until I got into the next vet station, Jack, I slowed down. And he went, whoop.
Yeah, he was kind of.
I finished 11th. I think he finished in the top 10. It's okay. That's okay. It's first and foremost was taking care of the horse.
That's right.
And yourself. You had to be okay.
Mm-hmm. And there's nothing too shabby about 11th place.
No.
So.
No, not on Tevis.
No.
No, not on Tevis at all. And then we did Applegate Lassen the one year. Oh, God. And like you say, it was so different because you had to have so much support system. Mm-hmm. And there was no water on that trail. You had to have somebody from a crew, so all the crews got together and would meet at certain places with water for all the horses.
Anybody on the ride would stop and give you water. Mm-hmm. You know, if they saw you out there and you needed water, they would give it to you.
Just a great learning experience. Yeah. And we got bested. We're out, what was it, day 5? And
we're at the hot spring?
No, the hot springs, that was one of them. And her horse goes in and starts drinking up. My horse wouldn't get in there. We jumped over it, we jumped over it, we jumped over it. So I got off, walked into the water to lead her in.
It was hot.
It was hot. It was a hot spring, it's sulfury. Yeah.
And your horse was drinking.
He drank, and her horse was just fine. Well, she was riding a gelding, and I was riding a mare. And then I think on the last day, we got to the windmill and a big cattle stock tank. Uh-huh. And we're there, and the horses are just tanking up, and we're not too far from the finish. And all of a sudden, windmill went, I went one way, and she went the other way. I mean, how did we stay on? That was a rodeo. Yeah. And we ended up finishing top 10.
Wow.
I mean, you had those experiences out in the middle of nowhere. And poor Phil, wasn't it? Which one it was. Met us he just made sure that he was there for us and other people we'd go along with somebody else. And we're going along and she says to me, well, it's about time for UPS. Now we're in the middle of BF nowhere. I said, UPS? She said, yep, about time for UPS. 5 minutes later, here comes the UPS truck.
There was a mine out there. Oh. And every single year that I went down that road, there was a UPS truck that came by.
And you thought she was probably psychic.
Oh, she shitting me big time.
But every single year, here comes this UPS truck.
And we had all those experiences that we could talk about.
Well, you two rode quite a few rides together.
Oh, we did.
A lot.
We did.
A lot of rides.
Yeah.
That is
a lot
great.
of things together.
I remember something else that happened at that ride is she had a cherry tree in her place in Loomis. She brought all these wonderful, wonderful cherries. Remember that horse Severin? He loved those cherries. He'd eat the cherries and he'd spit the pits out. He thought those cherries were just the greatest
I don't know if
thing.
that was the first ride I took Rusty.
Yeah, it was. Yes, you were going to take Rusty. You were going to take one of the other horses.
The other horses.
And something happened at the last minute and you decided you'd take
Tom
Rusty.
says, take her. She's a candy daughter, take her.
You know,
so I take her and she breaks out of the corral because we didn't have any of the fancy portable corrals then yet. Mm-hmm. PVC pipe with bungee cords. And she was an escape artist and go like this and goes, she ate everybody's hay and grain in the place. And I thought, I'm dead. I'm going to have a dead horse.
That I was riding was actually half brother to Dandy. And he was out of that Azraf daughter, out of Essex Saladin, who was a Seraphics son who had done well on the show circuit.
The Khalil horse.
Yes, yeah. Oh. But he was a big horse. He was about 16 hands, and he looked a lot like Seraphics. Big chestnut, and he had a funny blaze on his face like Seraphics did. Mm-hmm. And he was a nice horse. I ended up selling him to a good friend of mine.
Well, starting when we met a lot of the people. We met the Lacey's. We met a lot of these breeders because I got to know briefly Gladys Brown Edwards, who wrote the book. Got to be pretty good friends with Linda Tillington Jones because when I was at Cal Poly, she was at Hazard Canyon. We went and got, so we connected. You could do that in those days.
So when you're looking at the different bloodlines back then, you said you liked the old Abu Farwa, Ritez,
Gloucester, yeah.
Gloucester,
Ritez too.
crossings. And what about, I mean, of course, Bezital was the stallion that won Tevis. Everybody kind of, did you ever have any Bezital horses?
No,
or
I had a
experience with-
Rascala son.
No, I never had
Wow,
a
he was something.
Bezital horse. Didn't have anything against them. They just
No.
they weren't the breeding that I was, that I was doing. Most of my horses were, old, what I would call Kellogg American lines.
Yeah.
That type of thing. And it's not that you couldn't have crossed him, but he was basically Egyptian, and he wasn't fitting into my breeding program. And I mean, I had 2 stallions of my own, and
Right.
and it's
And
like
you want to promote those
exactly. You
horses.
kind of
and-
want to promote your own horses, and why. In other words,
Right.
I had Bezital was a wonderful horse, obviously. I mean, look at his record.
He seemed to be, and I could be wrong on this, but I know a number of people. I have a friend that had a very, very nice, very small Bezital mare.
Mm-hmm.
Tough little mare, but she didn't have the means to do a lot of rides. Okay, for a number of reasons. And I have some other friends that had a Bezital stallion. In fact, he was gelded to my front lawn. And
Well,
one was,
the Potatoes mare that won the ride was a Bezital granddaughter.
Right.
yeah.
So I mean that was a cross.
That was a
That was
cross.
great.
with-
That was a cross.
When you're
Yeah.
outcrossed with something, it
Exactly.
could really work, but a lot of times it wasn't working on a lot of them that I saw.
Mm-hmm.
The legs were, I don't think it was him because he had good legs from what I remember.
Yeah. Did you know
Okay.
Ed Johnson by any chance?
Yes.
You did? What was he like?
Nice.
Nice guy?
Nice guy.
I mean, I think that,
He really was. He was really focused on doing a job, but he also took care of his horse.
Yeah.
We don't want to get the tales of some of the people in Tevis we saw that didn't take care of them.
yeah. But, I mean, but like with Ed,
Nice horse.
he is known to be this great horseman. And, I mean, did you see that in him?
He was unbelievable. He was like a fly on a turd going down the hill. You hardly knew he was there,
Right.
I mean, it was really amazing to watch on the horse. And he felt, he's Native American too, right? A lot of, he really seemed to feel when to play it, when to not. When he did that, what was that ride, that death ride where they go, God.
Yeah, the suicide ride or
That
whatever
is
they called it.
absolutely amazing
Yeah.
that he did that, and he did that with that horse. And an Arab.
Yeah. And he
But
won
there
it.
again, talking about breeders, when I went through Cal Poly, I was in a class with Sheila Berrien, colt breaking class, and she had Ron Tessa. And I luckily used to go to Cal Palace every year. In fact, I rode in the color guard there on this big thoroughbred quarter horse Mortimer. And I saw her win the championship, the cow championship with an Arab mare, a woman. That never happened. A mare, not going to happen, because that's the way the old cowboy thinking was at that time.
Right.
And then an Arab against all the quarter horses. It was amazing.
Well, and Gandy did that too. He was showing open against and working cow against all breeds, quarter horses,
Who
and
was the people? Terry, what were the people that had cow horses in the Arab business?
well, there was Rush Creek.
No. Working cow.
Working cow.
Anyway, these people, nice, sturdy, sort of old-time Arab, not the real reachy, but just did a wonderful job with cow horses.
Yeah. Yeah, they can do it. And one of the things that I always thought was that the Tevis, it's about promoting, it started off with the idea of promoting the ride, the trail.
And proving that a horse could do.
And
100
proving that a
miles.
horse could do it. But Wendell was also owned an Arab.
Yep.
And he wanted
Lots of Arabs.
he wanted to prove the Arabian horse that it could do these kinds of distances.
What was that
And
stallion that he rode?
Bandos. Was it Bandos?
Was he, what country? Another country? I know I rode with him once and I had the horse on top of me almost.
Oh.
He was sometimes a little out of control.
Oh.
Mares.
Well, he had a stallion named Bandos.
Yeah, I know he had Bandos.
But I didn't
I don't
know
if
the
it
other
was-
horses.
I don't know if it was Bandos. Oh, I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
Having a snorting stallion.
Hello! Get it away, get it away, get it away. Oh yeah, that was something else. Yeah, it's a lot of good horses.
Yeah. Ro, to hear your to hear and see your passion about this ride.
Oh, I love it.
It's you know, it's inspiring.
Well, even
And-
when I got to where I couldn't ride or do as much riding, or it wasn't as much fun to do 100 miles anymore, I've stayed involved.
You
I
have.
was a vet secretary. I crewed, of course. Ham radio now, work the ham radio. I did SOS, Sweep Riders of the Sierras.
That's right.
We swept the trail on horseback. We were there from the day the run started. And see, we've proved from the horses that a man can run 100 miles.
That's right.
Or a woman. And been involved with that from the beginning. So it changed my life. It sent me in a different direction. And my mother said to me, why don't you want to go to Stanford? What would I take at Stanford? So, you know, all of this passion for the horses and the animals and then becoming involved with this gave me a whole different direction to go and to enjoy
Yeah.
and to be involved. And I think I've done every job. I worked the barns with Corky.
That's right.
I was in charge of marking trail for quite a few years. Thank you, Terry. He's gotten it now. Did a lot of stuff, everything. And it gave me a sense of a whole different scope on life, and it enabled me to go into law enforcement and kick ass.
That's right.
And I enjoyed that too.
You did.
Or else
Yeah.
could you watch 70 men in various states of undress in one room? It worked out quite well. It was good pay.
And you know, you made friends with Corky.
Oh,
you
sure.
have
Life,
these
yeah.
close friendships that are lasting
yeah.
a lifetime.
Kathy, Phil Gardner,
Right.
you guys, a lot of neat people.
Yeah.
I will say one thing, endurance riding is a special class of people that enjoy things to the umpteenth,
Yep.
no matter what it is. So now I foster border collies.
And you still are part of the
Oh, I'll always be part of
You'll
the ride.
always be there. And Corky, like I said, I get to see you at rides. I
Sure.
got to see you at Virginia City this
Yeah,
year, and
yeah.
and you're still, you know, there
Well, sure.
supporting your friends and
Right. You know,
and-
it's very hard to give up. You know, you may not
Oh,
be
it
able
is.
to ride anymore, but that doesn't mean that you don't want to be involved in some way. And
It's a mental illness.
you know, I mean, and these, you know, the organizations, whether it be the Tevis ride or the people from Virginia City, you know, they appreciate all the help that you give them.
yeah.
You know, and with Tevis, I had many different jobs. I mean, I did marketing. I ran the barn. You know, I was on the board. You know, there's
Same here. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
many,
Did all of that.
many different hats that you wear, and you know, it was fun. They were all different, and it was just a fun thing to do.
And learn more about
to-
horses and people
Oh,
than
sure,
in any other
sure.
aspect. I think.
Yeah,
you
I
would
mean,
have ever
running the
done.
barn, I met some fabulous people, you know, from all over the world that you know that come through there and whatnot. And
And you see the best and the worst in people and in the hard situations like
oh,
that.
sure,
Yeah.
sure.
You know, when a horse goes down or when something you have to be there to help. And the stories I could tell you from just riding sweep are staggering.
Well, we might have to do
What you
another
saw that.
another show on the sweep rides.
Oh,
Yeah. Well, I want to thank both of you for taking the time to
Oh,
come
you're
here
welcome. Thank you for
tonight.
being here.
And
Yeah, it was
and
fun.
you know
as
all
always,
the
it's fun to play with you.
oh. Well, the night's still young. So thank you very much, and thank you for all the hard work and just and what you've done, and to be part of this ride and our sport of endurance.
No?
Well, and it's wonderful that you, somebody that, with your talent, to do interviews, that's been there, done that, worn the hat, got the T-shirt.
Well,
it's wonderful.
And I get, and like, you know, I mean, side note is I've known Ro and Corky since I was a little kid. And so, and you knew my family.
Oh, sure.
My
Yeah,
uncle
yeah.
was your horseshoer before I was your horseshoer, and
Yeah.
you know, and my parents, and so it's fun to sit here with the two of you.
It was
and talk.
his own community.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right.
All
Well,
right.
that's a wrap.
It's the kind of thing that it has so much magic to it and so much energy on its own. It's almost like it's like a live organism.